I've touched enlightenment, but I can't seem to live it. That was the painful confession of a man who had spent 15 years immersed in spiritual practice. He sat across from Carl Jung in a quiet Zurich office in 1928, eyes heavy with the weight of his inner struggle. His journey had been extensive: study with Indian gurus, mastery of various meditation techniques, moments of pure awakening. He could quote sacred texts fluently and had experienced those rare states of consciousness where the ego seemed to dissolve. But back in daily life, something felt profoundly off. As soon as I returned to ordinary life, he said, I can't help needing everyone to notice how conscious I am. I sprinkle spiritual terms into conversations. I correct others subtly to show how advanced I've become. I've built my entire self-image on being spiritually awakened, and it's smothering me. Jung listened closely and then responded with a truth that would dismantle everything this man believed about his journey. You haven't awakened, Jung said. You've simply replaced your ego with a spiritual one. And that version is far more dangerous because it hides behind the illusion of consciousness. This moment shattered the patient's illusions. If you found yourself needing people to witness your awareness or using spiritual language to assert superiority, you may be caught in the same trap. What Jung and others came to call the spiritual ego. It is a cunning structure that takes even real spiritual experiences and recycles them into material for a new, more subtle identity. This man's practice wasn't shallow. It was intense daily hours of meditation, travel to sacred lands, study of non-dual philosophies and mystical traditions. He had tasted authentic states of presence that most never glimpse. But even after these real awakenings, where the self seemed to dissolve into stillness, something re-emerged. The need to be seen as someone who had arrived. He found himself constantly referring to India, to his insights, to the depth of his path. And worst of all, he was judging others. I catch myself silently ranking everyone, he admitted. My wife, my colleagues, fellow seekers. I classify them as more or less conscious than me, and in my mind, am always higher. Jung wasn't surprised. He had seen this pattern over and over, especially in those with the most sincere and long-standing practices. These weren't charlatans. They were dedicated seekers, now entangled in a more deceptive illusion than the ordinary ego. This was the trap of spiritual ego, where awareness becomes raw material for the construction of a new, superior self. Jung explained to the man that what he was experiencing was not failure, but a deeper stage of the journey, one that most seekers never recognize. You've had authentic glimpses of awakening, Jung said, but instead of dissolving the self, your ego quietly rebuilt itself using those very moments. Your identity is no longer successful or smart, it's now awakened and evolved. Same structure, new wallpaper. This revelation stunned the man. He had worked so hard to escape the trappings of ego, only to find that the ego had camouflaged itself within his spirituality. Jung warned him, this spiritual identity is even more dangerous because it believes it's transcended the need to defend itself. But in truth, it still compares, judges, separates, just with more refined language. Modern psychology now echoes what Jung observed. Dr. John Wellwood called it spiritual bypassing, using spiritual concepts to avoid confronting unresolved emotional wounds. But Jung was pointing to something deeper than avoidance. He saw how awareness itself was being used as a shield tool for performance, superiority, and disconnection. Dr. Tara Brach's research into identity formation revealed that the self is incredibly flexible. When one version of identity is threatened, the psyche doesn't crumble. It simply creates a new self-concept using available material. And for spiritual seekers, that material is awakening, presence, consciousness. Jung's patient was a living example. Every spiritual milestone, each retreat, insight, or mystical state became a notch on his spiritual resume. Instead of letting those moments transform him, he used them to construct an identity of the awakened one. This pattern is common in spiritual communities. The longer people practice, the more nuanced their ego defenses become. They may not seek status or wealth anymore, but they still seek recognition. Instead of being the smartest or richest in the room, they now need to be the most conscious. Jung gently asked the man, what finally opened your eyes to this pattern? He answered with visible vulnerability. I was at a spiritual event. Someone asked me about my practice. I launched into stories about India, my meditation depth, my insights, and suddenly, it was like I saw myself from outside. I looked pathetic, like a kid bragging about his toys. That was the moment. It all crumbled. I realized I was using spirituality to feel important, which is the opposite of being spiritual. Jung nodded. He had a term for this collapse. The blessed disillusionment. It's the sacred moment when you catch yourself in the act, not because someone called you out, but because your own awareness turns inward. and sees the game you've been playing. That's when real transformation becomes possible, not through more practices or deeper insights, but by recognizing how the ego has been hiding behind them all along. This blessed disillusionment, Jung believed, was the true beginning of inner freedom, not the end goal, but the honest starting point. It's the moment when the seeker realizes that the structure they've used to reach awakening is the very thing preventing it. You think your practices are leading you to freedom? Jung told him, but they've become bricks in a wall of performance. You're not dissolving the self, you're defending a new, more subtle version of it. The patient had thought his dedication was proof of progress, but in truth, it was proof of attachment. He couldn't experience spiritual peace without needing to showcase it. He couldn't have insights without planning how to share them. His awareness was no longer intimate, it had become a performance. This is the first sign of the trap. Subtle superiority. It doesn't shout, "I'm better than you." It quietly observes. They're still identified with ego, or she's at an earlier stage, or he hasn't done the work. These thoughts feel like wisdom, but beneath them is judgment, separation. The very thing awakening is meant to dissolve. Jung confronted this directly. True awareness doesn't rank levels, he said. The moment you believe you're more conscious than another person, you're back in ego. It's just speaking a more refined language. This wasn't a new insight. Even 500 years ago, the Buddha warned about the pride of attainment, a spiritual arrogance that appears late on the path and masquerades as wisdom. He taught that it was one of the final fetters to dissolve because of how justified and subtle it seems. Research into spiritual narcissism confirms this ancient teaching. Many spiritual groups develop a strong divide between us and them, those who are awake versus those who are still asleep. The patient began to see this everywhere in his life. I feel superior when someone says they don't meditate. He confessed, I judge people who care about ordinary things like career or money. I subtly position myself as the wise one in every conversation. I thought I was just seeing clearly. But now I see I need others to be less conscious so I can feel more conscious. That statement revealed the foundation of the trap. It builds a hierarchy with the self always at the top. Every interaction becomes a way to confirm one's elevated status. But that's only the first layer. By month 3, the patient discovered something even more disturbing. I can't have a spiritual experience anymore, he said, without immediately thinking about how he'll share it before the insight is even complete. In rehearsing how it will sound, how others will react, how impressive it will seem. This is the second layer of the trap, spiritual performance. This second layer, spiritual performance, is where the trap becomes deeply exhausting. It hijacks the present moment and transforms it into content for an imaginary audience. Instead of simply experiencing clarity, peace, or insight, the mind rushes to craft how that moment will be shared, praised, or validated. The patient confessed, even during meditation, as soon as I sense a moment of stillness, my thoughts jump to how I'll describe it. I think about the perfect words to use, the people who'll be impressed. I can't even be present without narrating the presence. Week after week, this pattern emerged, a flash of awakening interrupted by an inner performance, an authentic insight contaminated by anticipation, stillness shattered by the mental camera preparing the perfect shot. Jung called this the compulsive performance of awakening. It's when the experience itself loses its value unless it can be witnessed, validated, or admired. You meditate, then make sure others know you did. You read spiritual texts, then quote them strategically. You post photos of yourself being present, turning presence into a branding tool. One of Jung's other patients revealed a similar truth. I realized I don't read spiritual books for growth anymore. I read them to have something smart to say later. My entire practice has become a way to impress people. Another said, I sit longer in meditation when I know we'll see my spiritual friends. It's no longer about the practice, it's about having something to report, like a badge of honor. These confessions highlight a sad reality. Genuine spiritual life is slowly replaced by curated spirituality, a version designed to be consumed and admired, even before the digital age. Jung saw this happening. Today, social media only amplifies it. But the trap doesn't need technology. It finds a mirror anywhere. Friends, communities, even therapy. The patient admitted something crucial. Sometimes, I come to our sessions not to get help, but to impress you. I want you to think I'm insightful, self-aware, advanced. The therapy has become another performance. He was exhausted, drained from constantly crafting and managing a spiritual image. I'm tired of dropping hints about my practices, tired of subtly presenting myself as awakened, tired of pretending transformation. Jung asked him, if you stopped performing, who would you be? The patient hesitated. That question struck at the core of the trap. Without the performance, the identity collapses. And what's left? That's the very edge of real awakening. The trap can only function if it's constantly being fed through recognition and validation. Once you stop feeding it, by ceasing to perform, it begins to die. But there's still a deeper layer, one more insidious manifestation of the trap: spiritual materialism. The compulsive urge to accumulate spiritual experiences, credentials, and associations not for growth, but for identity construction. It was during their 6th month of work together that Jung saw the third and deepest layer of the trap begin to unravel. The patient mentioned, almost offhandedly, that he was planning another journey to India. Jung tilted his head. Why? The patient replied, "There's a teacher there, said to have reached some of the highest levels of consciousness. I want to study with him." Jung gently pressed further. "Do you want to learn, or do you want to have studied with him?" There was a long pause. Then, quietly, the patient admitted, "I want to collect him, like I've collected the others." This was spiritual materialism in its rawest form. Not the sincere desire for growth, but the subtle craving to gather spiritual trophies. To be able to say, "I've studied with this master, read that sacred text, had this peak experience." Each moment of awakening became an entry on a spiritual R-sum. Each encounter with a teacher became a credential. Each insight, a currency of worth. "I have a mental checklist," the patient confessed. "Teachers I've met, states I've reached, books I've mastered, and I'm always comparing that list to others, seeing who has the deeper experience, who's gone further." Jung recognized the pattern. Shyam Trungpa would later name it explicitly: spiritual materialism, the ego's ability to hijack spiritual practice and convert it into self-enhancement. This is especially common in Western spiritual seekers, where achievement is deeply ingrained. We're taught from childhood to build, accomplish, accumulate, and when we step into the spiritual world, we carry that same mindset. Meditation becomes a competition. Insight becomes a performance. Even humility gets performed. The trap whispers. More practice equals more awakening equals more worth. But real transformation isn't about collecting. It's about releasing. The patient, through tears, began to see it clearly. Every retreat, every guru, every mystical moment, I used it to construct a new version of myself. Not to dissolve the ego, but to evolve it into something more impressive. Jung responded with a profound truth. The one who seeks enlightenment will never find it, because the act of seeking creates the illusion that awakening is somewhere else, something to acquire. And that illusion is the trap's favorite game. There's always another book, another teacher, another layer to explore. Seeking becomes a lifestyle and never ends, because as long as you're the seeker, you're never the found. The patient suddenly understood, "I don't want to be free. I want to be the one who is becoming free. I want to be seen as someone pursuing enlightenment, because that identity makes me feel important." That was the core of it, using spirituality to be special. But true freedom requires the opposite, letting go of the need to be different, better, more evolved. The trap wants to elevate itself. Real presence dissolves the self that needs elevation. Jung understood that no amount of additional practice would untangle this trap. It wasn't more effort that was needed. It was a radical kind of surrender. So, in their 7th month, Jung gave the patient a surprising assignment. For the next month, he said, "I want you to become spiritually invisible." The patient blinked in confusion. "What does that mean?" "It means," Jung explained, "when someone asks about your spiritual path, you say, 'I don't really have one.' When you have an insight, you keep it to yourself. When someone says something spiritually naive, you don't correct them. You let the world think you're completely ordinary." The man looked horrified. "But that would be dishonest. I do have a practice. I do have insights." Jung nodded gently. "I'm not asking you to stop practicing. I'm asking you to stop performing. Can you still be spiritual if no one knows it?" This was the essence of the release technique, not achieving higher states, but interrupting the need to display them. Jung called it the practice of non-performance. It had 3 simple but devastating components. First, the patient was told to observe the trap in action without resisting it. Every time he was about to mention meditation, notice it. Every time he wanted to correct someone's understanding, observe the urge. Every time he reached for spiritual language, just watch it arise. No judgment, no suppression, just awareness. After a week, he returned shaken. "I didn't realize how constant it is. Almost every sentence I speak has a spiritual motive beneath it. I'm not just being awake, I'm displaying awakening." By the 2nd week, something had shifted. I hear the performance now. Even as I speak, I hear the trap constructing identity beneath my words. It feels fake, like watching a magician reveal his own trick. Research on metacognition supports this. The act of observing a behavior begins to dissolve it, because identity requires unconscious maintenance. The moment you see the machinery behind it, it starts to collapse. The patient described a powerful moment at a dinner party. Someone asked what I do for self-care. My old self would have said, I meditate deeply every day. But I caught myself. I saw the ego preparing its script, and I just said, I try to get enough sleep. I guess it felt more honest than anything I've said in years. The second component was harder. Allow others to see you as spiritually ordinary and don't correct their assumptions. When someone explains mindfulness badly, Jung said, let them. When someone assumes you know nothing, don't contradict them. Let people think you're just another regular person. The patient protested, that feels like betrayal, like him denying everything I've worked for. Jung responded, that's the trap dying. It needs to be seen as special. Letting that go is the most radical act of spiritual freedom. The practice of spiritual invisibility quickly turned from uncomfortable to transformative. At first, the patient felt humiliated. A coworker began explaining breathing techniques to him as if he were a total beginner. His ego screamed to reveal the truth. I've meditated for 15 years. I've studied in India. But instead, he smiled, listened, and thanked the colleague for the advice. He described the moment in therapy. I felt like I was betraying my own journey, like all those years of practice were being erased by not defending them. Jung replied with a simple truth. That's not betrayal. That's freedom. You're no longer using your practice to elevate yourself. The humiliation you're feeling, that's the trap unraveling. Research on ego dissolution supports this. When we stop performing our identity, especially one we've invested years into, it feels like death. But what dies isn't the true self. It's the constructed self, the illusion we've clung to for meaning and validation. The patient practiced week after week, letting himself be perceived as spiritually ordinary. He allowed others to underestimate him. He didn't correct misunderstandings or offer unsolicited wisdom. He just showed up as a human, nothing more. And then, something strange happened. My colleague was talking about mindfulness again, he said, and this time, I didn't feel humiliated. I felt amused, tender, like watching a kid explain something new they just learned. There was no need to interrupt, no impulse to prove anything. The whole urge to be the knower was gone. He was beginning to embody what Jung called spiritual anonymity, presence that doesn't need to announce itself. He stopped name-dropping teachers. He stopped referencing his insights. He no longer positioned himself as the most aware person in the room. He just was, and with that ordinariness, something beautiful returned. When I stopped performing spirituality, he said, I started actually experiencing it again. The insights felt real again. Private, intimate, like they were for me, not for display. I went to a spiritual event recently. Everyone was sharing their experiences, comparing practices, signaling how evolved they were, and I just sat there. I didn't say anything. I asked questions like a beginner, and in that silence, I felt more awake than I have in years. Jung observed this shift with deep satisfaction. True spiritual maturity, he noted, rarely looks impressive from the outside. It doesn't seek recognition. It doesn't perform. It just quietly is. You can know things, Jung told him, without needing to be the one who knows. You can have insights without needing to be known for them. The question isn't what you know, it's whether you need to be known for knowing it. The man took that wisdom to heart. Over the following weeks, he began practicing what Jung called complete ordinariness. Not the performance of humility, not saying, oh, I'm just a beginner, while secretly feeling superior, but actually letting go of the need to be seen as anything at all. He stopped offering opinions about awareness, stopped subtly signaling his spiritual depth, stopped trying to be the conscious one in every situation. Instead, he simply showed up as a person lawed, curious, unguarded. And then the deeper shift began. The trap can't survive being seen clearly and not fed. Jung had told him, when you see it in action and choose not to perform, when you allow yourself to be seen as ordinary, when you stop defending the illusion, you starve it. The patient began feeling this starvation happening. The trap wasn't collapsing through confrontation, but through neglect, like a fire that dies out when you stop feeding it oxygen. The most unexpected part, as the trap weakened, other lifelong struggles began dissolving automatically. He returned one day, visibly changed. Something's happening, he said. I've been doing the practice spiritual invisibility, not performing, letting myself be seen as normal. And now, it's like everything else is collapsing too. Jung leaned forward. Tell me. I saw it all clearly. These 15 years of spiritual work, maybe 10% of it was genuine. The rest, ego dressed up in robes, seeking attention, status, superiority. I took real insights and used them to build a fake identity. He choked back tears. It wasn't that my experiences weren't real. They were, but I weaponized them for validation, for control, for meaning. Jung called this moment the sacred humiliation when you see your own performance with such raw honesty that shame and liberation arrive at the same time. It's crushing and it's sacred. Research in transformative change confirms that this kind of embarrassment is not a sign of failure, it's a gateway. When the illusion collapses so completely that you feel exposed, naked, even ashamed, you are closer to truth than ever before. Week after week, the man reported more shifts. I stopped caring about how long I meditate. He said, I used to track it, optimize it, feel proud of it. Now, I sit when I want to, not to achieve something, just because it feels right. No metrics, no reporting, no meaning, just sitting. That was the first automatic release. Approval seeking, it vanished. Not because he fought it, but because the structure that sustained it had dissolved. Then came others, the need to be special, the performance of peace, the hunger for certainty, even the impulse to correct others, one by one. They dropped away, not through effort, but through non-performance. The patient began to feel like a different person. Not because he became more spiritual, but because he no longer needed to be. The constant effort to appear evolved was gone, and with it, a flood of unexpected freedoms emerged. I realized, he said, I'm just a human, not a special human, not an awakened human, just a person having experiences like everyone else, and that's enough. At dinner with friends, someone assumed he knew nothing about meditation. The old version of him would have corrected them immediately, slipping in details about Indian ashrams or hours of daily practice. The new version simply smiled and asked, what's your experience been like? The need to be seen as special had vanished, and with it, the compulsive urge to manage others' perceptions dissolved. Another shift emerged, the performance of peace. I used to pretend to be spiritually serene all the time, he admitted, even when I was frustrated or anxious. I'd filter it through the lens of awareness like, oh, I'm witnessing the anger arise. But now, if I'm angry, I say, I'm angry. If I'm sad, I'm just sad. I'm not hiding behind spiritual language anymore. I'm just being human. His wife noticed the difference almost immediately. You're more present, she told him, not because you're trying to demonstrate presence, but because you're actually here with me. Presence had stopped being a performance and had become presence. Another release followed, certainty. The man, once armed with rigid opinions about awakening, consciousness, and enlightenment, now found freedom in not knowing. I used to feel this need to explain spiritual truth, he said, to have the right view, the right take, the most evolved opinion. Now, I don't know, and that feels good. It's not emptiness, it's openness. Mystery feels more alive than answers ever did. Even blame transformed. He used to silently resent his wife for not understanding his spiritual journey. But now, he could see the truth. I was using spirituality to avoid intimacy. The trap kept me superior and distant. Now, without it, I can just connect with here as equals spiritual bypassing. The use of practice to avoid emotional work became impossible. I can't meditate my way out of grief anymore. I can't quote my way out of anxiety. I feel it. I stay in it. And that's become the real practice, being fully human. And perhaps most powerfully, isolation dissolved. The trap had created distance from unawakened people. But now, that wall was gone. I used to think I was different from others, he admitted. More aware, more conscious. Now, I relate to everyone, the barista, my neighbor, my accountant. Everyone's just living, struggling, growing. We're not that different. Jung documented it all carefully. The man wasn't just evolving, he was unbecoming, and that's what changed everything. Jung had seen this phenomenon before, but never so clearly. When the spiritual ego trap collapses, it sets off a cascade of releases. It was as if this identity, the need to be the awakened one, was the load-bearing wall holding up every other attachment. The performance, the pride, the spiritual materialism, the seeking, the judgments, all of it depended on maintaining that one false self. Once it fell, the entire structure crumbled. The patient described it simply. It's like I was carrying this huge framework seeking, proving, striving, and the moment I stopped feeding the need to be special, the whole thing unraveled, not with a bang, just quietly. Here was the transformation. As Jung recorded it, before the collapse, needing to be seen as spiritually advanced, judging others as less aware, constantly sharing insights, accumulating credentials and experiences, using awakening to feel superior, avoiding difficult emotions through spiritual concepts, feeling separate from ordinary people. After the collapse, practicing privately, without announcement, seeing all people as equally valid, experiencing presence without performance, letting go of accumulation, embracing ordinariness, fully feeling human emotions, connecting deeply with everyone. You haven't become less spiritual, Jung told him. You've simply become less identified with being spiritual, and that has made you more genuinely present than 15 years of trying ever did. The patient smiled, tears rising. I spent 15 years trying to awaken. The moment I stopped trying to be the awakened one, It was already here. He had finally understood. Awakening is not something you achieve. It's what's left when you stop preventing it. Every experience, every insight, every practice he once used to prove his awareness had only been feeding the illusion. But now, the fuel was gone, and what remained was ordinary, honest, free. If you've experienced this kind of unraveling, Jung once wrote, "Know this, the collapse is not a loss, it's a return. You are not the conscious one. You are not the evolved one. You are not the special one. You are simply here, awake. Yes, but with no need to be seen as awakened. Present but not performative. Human fully, vulnerably, wonderfully human." And that, Jung believed, was enlightenment in its truest form. 1 year after their first session, the man returned to Jung's office for what would be their final meeting. Jung welcomed him with a calm smile. "How are you?" The man thought for a long time, then said, "I'm ordinary, and it's the most extraordinary thing I've ever experienced." Jung nodded. "Tell me what that means." "I still meditate," the man explained, "but not to chase enlightenment or to reach some exalted state. I do it because sitting quietly feels right. That's all. No strategy, no performance, no higher purpose, just silence." He paused, then continued. "I still have insights, flashes of clarity, moments of stillness, but I don't collect them anymore. I don't write them down to share. I don't bring them into conversation. They're mine, private, sacred." This was spiritual maturity. Presence that no longer needs a stage. Insight that doesn't need applause. Stillness that doesn't need to be posted. His relationships transformed too. My wife says I'm more present than ever. Not because I'm quoting awareness or radiating calm, but because I'm actually here with her, listening, responding, not thinking about how conscious I appear just being with her. At work, he was the same. No spiritual language, no subtle signaling. He wasn't bringing consciousness into the workplace. He was just a man doing his job, and doing it with quiet care. And somehow, he said, that felt more spiritual than all the philosophy he once forced into conversations. He began practicing 2 core principles every day. Practice 1, spiritual anonymity. When people ask about self-care, I say, I try to sleep enough. When someone talks about meditation, I thank them like I've never heard it before. When spiritual topics come up, I ask questions. I listen. I don't drop references. I don't signal awareness. My practice is private. My insights are quiet. My growth doesn't need to be known. It wasn't false modesty. It was truth, a spirituality so authentic, it didn't need validation to exist. Practice 2, embracing unconsciousness. I got angry at my kid last week, he said. Old me would have analyzed it. I was witnessing the anger arise, spiritually bypassing it. New me, I said. I am sorry, I yelled. That wasn't okay. No performance, no consciousness filter, just accountability. He stopped defending his level of awareness. If he was reactive, he admitted it. If he was petty, he owned it. If he was ego-driven, he acknowledged it. No more pretending to be above human experience, just living it fully. Studies on authenticity confirm what Jung observed. Spiritual growth isn't about erasing unconsciousness. It's about being honest with it and choosing presence within it. In the final weeks of their work, Jung simply observed, the man no longer asked how to deepen his awareness or how to evolve further. He didn't bring insights to discuss. He didn't seek feedback on his growth. Instead, he talked about small, quiet things, making coffee in the morning, feeling the warmth of the cup, watching birds from the window. Nothing special happened. He said one day, no deep realization, no peak experience, just this moment, and it was complete. That was the final understanding. Awakening wasn't hidden in mystical states or dramatic breakthroughs. It wasn't in hours of meditation or years of study. It was here, always had been, beneath the performance, behind the trap, within the ordinary. He let his colleague explain meditation to him again, and instead of inwardly judging, he listened, curious and warm. When his brother asked for advice, he simply replied, I don't know. What do you think? No longer the teacher, just a brother. His daughter struggled with homework, and he didn't jump to rescue her with conscious parenting. He just said, that sounds frustrating. What do you think might help? And she, in turn, discovered her own resilience. He had become invisible in the best way, not absent, deeply present, but no longer needing recognition, identity, or applause for it. Studies on mindfulness confirm what Jung long suspected. Ordinary awareness, embedded in daily life, is more transformative than peak states that remain disconnected from reality. And now, as he sat in Jung's office one last time, he articulated what he had come to know. For years, I chased enlightenment. I sought, practiced, achieved, and yes, I had real awakenings. But I used those awakenings to build a self. I became the awakened one, and that identity, beautiful as it looked, was a cage. Jung nodded. The trap, the man said, was the last illusion. The one that turns awareness into superiority. That uses insight to separate. That performs presence for recognition. And then he said, what Jung had been waiting to hear. Now I know. Awakening isn't something I achieve. It's what's already here when I stop performing. Stop pretending. Stop preventing it. The patient stood, preparing to leave. But before he walked out, he paused. There's something strange, he said, smiling, now that Evie let go of needing to be spiritual. People say I help them more. My wife feels closer. My coworkers trust me more. Even strangers seem at ease around me. Jung smiled back. That's because genuine spirituality isn't about being special. It's about being real, not about transcending your humanity, but about embodying it fully. Not about becoming somebody extraordinary, but realizing you were always nobody special, and that nobody is everything. CTA, if this message resonated with you, if you found yourself performing awareness, seeking recognition, or caught in the spiritual ego trap, you're not alone. We all face this moment, and the way through isn't becoming more spiritual. It's becoming more honest. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more explorations on authentic transformation. Leave a comment below in Becoming Nobody, because in that release, everything changes.